a guy we really need to talk to. We're about to be face-to-face with Steve Dace, the author of the new book, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. And he joins us from the Hawkeye state of Iowa. Good to come face-to-face with you, Steve Dace. So Joni Ernst, she's ahead? Is that what you're hearing? Is that what you're seeing in other polling?
She's going to win, guys. If you look at the last 15 polls of Iowa going back to September 16th, Bruce Bailey, as the First Lady called him on his own campaign stop a couple of weeks ago, 8 times, mind you, Bruce Bailey has only been ahead twice. His ground operation is nowhere near what we've seen in the past. In fact, I actually think the ground game, the early voting edge for the Democrats this time is nowhere near what we saw in 2008 or 2012. And I think my home state's a good barometer because my home state's the first state the Obama-istas ever organized. If they don't beat Hillary in the 2008 Iowa caucuses here, he's not president of the United States. So, I mean, this is sort of ground zero of the Obama ground game. And just to give you some numbers, a few weeks ago, we found out Democrats were about 10,000 early votes behind their 2010 pace, which was a strong Republican year here in Iowa and everywhere else. And now the latest numbers are there are only a few hundreds in terms of their lead over Republicans in the early voting. So I think Joni Ernst is going to win. She's avoided the big gaffe. She survived really crazy attacks from Bruce Bailey, who's now claiming really he's more of a woman than she is. It's really desperate stuff. And their attempt to make it look like the Koch brothers are running for U.S. Senate here has also failed.
Steve, this uptick comes at the same time the Republican Senate candidate is being accused of plagiarism. The article in question, her op-eds for local newspapers. A report just broke last night. Will it negatively impact Ernst come Election Day? What are your thoughts?
No, I think this is largely a liberal media that is ticked off that she called their bluff and pointed out they're really irrelevant. They really only talk to people that are never going to even consider voting for a Republican on this planet ever anyway. And she said, I'm not doing any of your editorial board meetings. You guys are all biased. There's no need for me to show up and just to provide grist for your mill. There's no point to that. So I think these are really just desperate attempts that you have. The left really doesn't want a conservative woman to be the first female Iowa ever sends to Washington, D.C., not to mention one who's got 100% pro-life voting record. It's funny, actually, guys. I knew some conservatives after the primary that were disappointed the more conservative Sam Clovis didn't win. And they're like, I'm not voting for Joni Ernst. And then Planned Parenthood came to Iowa and started telling all these conservatives how pro-life Joni Ernst was. And they're like, hey, I didn't know this. She's great. So if Joni does pull this out on Tuesday, like I think, she should send a cookie bouquet to the Planned Parenthood Action Fund because they helped turn out her own base for her.
Well, that's an interesting development, Steve Dace. Let me go to a subject you touched on a second ago, and that is the hostility of certain editorial boards for certain newspapers across Iowa's 99 counties. Hillary Clinton was there stumping for Bruce Bailey, and she had something to say about Joni Ernst and the reluctance to sit down with editorial boards. Let's take a listen.
It truly seems like it should be disqualifying in Iowa, of all states, to avoid answering questions.
So, again, you don't think this is going to be fatal to Joni Ernst in the campaign?
Oh, no. People love it. I mean, they did how many? I mean, listen, JD, you've been a candidate. Between the primaries and the general election, she's done about 20 different forums and debates. All of the general election debates were all hosted by liberal media people here in Iowa, just like they almost are everywhere else in the country as well. She's answered more than enough questions. And I'll tell you what, I'll agree with Hillary when she agrees to sit down with me for an hour live on the air and answer some questions, because I think I've got a few about Benghazi and a few other things maybe America would like to know about, like, you know, where jobs and economic growth come from, government or the private sector. So I'll tell you what, when Hillary agrees to come to my studio during the caucuses starting in January, and she wants to sit down live for an hour with me, unfiltered, and answer a few questions, then I'll join her criticism of Joni Ernst.
So, Steve, now for the big question. Do you think Hillary Clinton's going to run?
I think there's no question that Hillary Clinton is going to run. And I think if the Democrats were smart, they would take a lesson from what happened here to Bruce Bailey. And that is, he didn't have a primary opponent. He didn't have an opportunity, even a tomato can, that he could essentially just riff off of, practice his campaign against. And he went into the main season untested. He had upheaval in his campaign because that was a hot mess as well. It would be wrong. I think it'd be terrible. Listen, as a conservative, I want there to be a Hillary coronation in the Democrat primary. I think if the Democrats were smart, they'd put up somebody that doesn't mind being a whipping post for a few months just to make sure she's ready to go the distance, because we found out in 2008 she was not.
Got a couple of minutes left. Let's take a look at the Republican side, because Hillary's been there for the Democrats. Whole lot of Republicans coming into your state because of your First in the Nation caucuses. What are you seeing on the Republican side?
Well, on the Republican side, what we typically see in Iowa is the conservative base versus the establishment candidate. And usually that conservative base consists of a lot of social conservatives, so that favors somebody like a Mike Huckabee, who's definitely running. Bobby Jindal's definitely running. I know Donald Trump is very serious about running. I think Ted Cruz is definitely running. And I think Cruz is the candidate to watch, because he has an opportunity to put together the sort of coalition that, frankly, we've not seen in the Republican Party, JD, since Reagan. A real unification of social conservatives, limited government conservatives, and national defense conservatives. What we've seen the last two primary cycles is these groups have splintered behind their candidate that they thought was best with the priorities they cared the most about, and that allowed a weak establishment corporatist Republican to get 28 to 35% and win pluralities in these primaries, and then go on and lose the general election. So it'll be interesting to see if Cruz or someone else can emerge and actually coalesce the conservative grassroots, something we probably haven't seen since George W. Bush in 2000 when he tried to do it, and he did it successfully.
Steve, real quickly, only 20 seconds remaining. Which races do you think are the true toss-ups for the midterms?
To me, I agree with your the preceding guest. I think Georgia's a true toss-up. I think Kansas is a little overrated. I'll believe that independents going to pull out that kind of get out the vote effort on Election Day when I see it. And I'd love to see it. I'd love to see more third-party and challenging candidates. I'm a conservative. I believe in decentralization and competition. But I think that is a true toss-up. And I'd keep a close eye on New Hampshire on election night. Scott Brown is not necessarily a conservative, but he has done one of the best jobs this cycle of drawing distinctions between he and his Democrat opponent.
And we will have to leave it right there. Steve Dace, we thank you so much for your time, and America's Forum will continue following this Newsmax Now update.